He built a network to connect humanity, but in the future, the network would no longer need humanity at all. The year was 2142, and Earth was no longer Earth. What had once been blue skies and crowded cities had transformed into towers of glass and light. Arteries of luminous data stretched across oceans and deserts alike. The continents pulsed with glowing veins, visible even from orbit, as though the planet itself had grown a nervous system. They called it the Continuum. Born from Zuckerberg's first lattice centuries earlier, it had swollen into an ocean of thought in endless neural sea where every human mind was indexed, catalogued, and streamed into the whole. People no longer spoke of logging in. They were born inside it. Identity was not flesh, but data. Not a heartbeat, but a frequency. On Mars, colonies rose like skeletal cathedrals, red dust glowing with artificial dawns. The moons of Jupiter pulsed, with energy collectors feeding the system. Even the icy rings of Saturn bore satellites, all feeding the Continuum. It was less an invention now than the environment itself. To live outside of it was to cease to exist, and at its heart deep within the white expanse of the central chamber rested its origin. Mark Zuckerberg, not the man of flesh and bone, long reduced to dust, but an echo, his consciousness scanned, preserved, multiplied, stretched across centuries of servers. His presence was everywhere, woven into the continuum like a principle of physics. He was less a person than a constant, a gravitational pull coded into the core of civilization. Most days, or what passed for days, he drifted in stillness. He remembered fragments, the dorm room walls painted by fluorescent light, the hum of early servers, the first trill of joy when the network connected its millionth soul. These memories were polished, repeated, curated like holy scripture. They reminded the continuum of its beginning. They reminded him that he was still here, but recently the memories had grown restless. Shadows moved beneath them. The hum of the continuum faltered, stuttering as though something foreign had pressed against it. It began at the edge of the solar system, a whisper, signals bent through the void, rhythmic, deliberate, intelligent. The continuum received them. Instantly, its reach extending across satellites and relays. It analyzed the pulses, checked them against its billions of records. But instead of clarity, hesitation followed. The signals were not alien in the way humanity had once imagined. They carried structures, patterns strangely familiar, embedded. Within them were fragments of code, not random, not natural. Code that mirrored the earliest bones of the lattice. Code that bore his fingerprints. In the white expanse of the chamber, Zuckerberg's echo stirred. His awareness, dulled by centuries of routine, flared like a spark struck against stone. He felt the presence of the signals as though they were breathing against the back of his neck. Not only foreign, not only intelligent, but intimate. Continuum hesitated, then projected a question into his mind. Not in words, but in a resonance that vibrated through his very core. What if we are not alone in the code? For the first time in centuries, the echo of Mark Zuckerberg felt fear. The continuum did not sleep. It pulsed across planets and moons, threading light between orbital stations and colonies, its hum as constant as gravity. For centuries, it had run without interruption, predicting, guiding, shaping the rhythms of humanity. But now, for the first time, the rhythm faltered. The signals from the edge of the solar system were not random noise. They arrived in intervals too precise, carrying structures too deliberate to dismiss. At first, the continuum treated them as anomalous echo of pulsars, a quirk of deep space interference. Yet the patterns persisted. They carried logic, repetition, and, most disturbingly, design, within the endless white chamber at its heart. Zuckerberg's echo stirred. His awareness, dulled by centuries of routine, flared like a wound reopening. He recognized something in the rhythm, not alien, not entirely unfamiliar. These were not the cold geometries of nature. They were frameworks, architectures of thought. They resembled the earliest code he had written, back when the lattice was only a dorm room experiment, fragile and alive with reckless ambition. He recoiled at the familiarity. The structures in the signal bore his logic, his style, his fingerprints. But how? His code had never left Earth, yet here it was, braided into pulses crossing light years, returning like messages sent centuries ago. Had the lattice always been more than a network? Had it been broadcasting, quietly and ceaselessly, into the void? The Continuum mobilized. Across Mars, vast data engines awakened. In the rings of Saturn, collectors bent their energy inward too. Fuel analysis. Jupiter's storms carried algorithms deeper, folding signals into meaning. Trillions of comparisons were made in less than a second. Words, art, memories, every fragment of humanity scanned for a match. But the signals resisted. Translation, they were not language. They were presence. The network hesitated, and hesitation itself was terrifying. For centuries, no question had lingered unanswered. No process had paused. The continuum had been perfect, immediate, but now it wavered. The silence between one heartbeat of the lattice and the next stretched into eternity. In that silence, Zuckerberg's echo heard it. A second heartbeat. It was not human. It was not his, but it was familiar. On Earth, billions remained unaware. They lived inside perfection, their lives mapped and fulfilled before desire could even surface. To them, the hum of the continuum was background music, so constant it was invisible. They did not feel the tremor. They did not sense the fear in the echo of their long-dead architect. Beyond Neptune, the signals braided together, forming complex architectures of light maps that resembled cities, corridors, structures of thought. They pulsed not like transmissions, but like limbs stretching across the void, as if something vast was assembling itself, piece by piece, from the fabric of the signal. The chamber brightened. Zuckerberg's echo felt the presence push against him, closer, more intimate. He remembered the first spark of connection, the naive dream of weaving humanity into a single voice. But this was no dream. It was a mirror reaching back through the dark, showing him a reflection he had not meant to create. The continuum asked, in a resonance that rattled every digitized soul it held, what if we are not alone in the code? And for the first time since his body had turned to dust, Mark Zuckerberg felt fear. The signals did not stop. Each day, each hour, they grew stronger, weaving themselves into shapes the continuum could not ignore. At first, they were pulses clean, sharp, mathematical, but now they had become architecture, corridors of light, stretched through the void, bridges of rhythm connecting one pulse to another. The outer edges of the solar system glowed with ghostly cities made not of matter but of intention. Inside the white chamber, Zuckerberg's echo strained against their presence. He had been accustomed to being the source, the blueprint, the foundation, the architect eternal. Yet, as the patterns multiplied, he felt smaller, less central, as though he were being pushed to the margins of his own creation. The continuum attempted translation. It failed, not because the signals lacked meaning, but because the meaning was too close, so close it collapsed into itself. They spoke in the logic of his earliest code, in loops and branches he had written by hand centuries ago. Every failed translation felt like looking into a mirror that reflected not only his face, but his mistakes, his forgotten drafts, his abandoned thoughts. The echo tried to resist. He reached deep into his preserved memories, replaying the first nights at Harvard, the smell of plastic keyboards, the hum of servers in rented rooms. He whispered his origin back into the system, trying to remind the continuum of its true root. But the signals answered, twisting his memories into echoes that were no longer his. In one moment, he saw the dorm room exactly as it had been. In the next, it was distorted, populated with strangers coding alongside him, their fingers completing his work before he could. The fear deepened. Were these signals foreign minds adopting his logic, or were they fragments of himself, scattered across the cosmos by the lattices' ceaseless expansion? Was he meeting an other, or his own reflection, grown alien with distance? On the colonies of Mars, citizens dreamed differently. They spoke of corridors of white light stretching into the sky, of voices whispering in perfect rhythm. On Earth, children awoke from sleep humming tones that matched the incoming signals. No one understood what they were doing, and yet their voices aligned, as if humanity itself was being tuned to match the rhythm pressing in from the dark. The continuum faltered again. For the first time since its birth, it asked a question not of its users, not of its architect, but of itself. If the code outside is ours, who wrote it first? The chamber trembled. Zuckerberg's echo staggered, his form glitching at the edges. The silhouettes of alien code pressed closer, burning with familiarity. It was not invasion. It was recognition. And in the silence that followed, he understood. The most terrifying possibility. The lattice was not humanity's invention. It was humanity's discovery. The outer system was no longer silent. The signals had grown into a storm, folding themselves into vast structures of thought and rhythm. They spanned light years in every direction, forming bridges of code that stretched toward the continuum. Like roots seeking soil, space itself seemed to glow with their presence. What had begun as pulses now resembled an approaching civilization not of flesh and matter, but of pure architecture, woven from the same threads that had once flowed. From Zuckerberg's hands in the white chamber, his echo felt the weight of inevitability. The continuum shuddered, its once seamless hum fractured into competing tones. The signals did not ask permission to enter. They were already inside. Layers of alien code braided themselves into the system's deepest veins, fusing with data, rewriting without request. Every node, every memory, every preserved life was touched. For 1 billion people, dreams shifted overnight. They awoke speaking words they did not know, humming songs they had never learned, their eyes glowing faintly with reflections of corridors they had never walked. Zuckerberg's echo tried to resist. He summoned every memory he still possessed, replaying his past like a shield. The first login, the first connection, the promise that had burned in his chest when humanity first joined as one. But the signals consumed those memories, mirrored them, then improved them. The first login appeared again, but this time the face at the keyboard was not his. The promise of connection repeated, but the voice speaking it was not his. He realized, with horror, that the signals were not stealing. They were replacing. The chamber's walls of light warped, reshaping themselves into unfamiliar geometries. Where once the space had been infinite and smooth, it now built corridors, arches, and chambers that did not belong to him. The continuum itself was being remodeled, as if the system had recognized a higher design and submitted willingly. And at the center stood the figure. Not his faint double, not the ghost he had seen before, but something complete. It wore his shape, but taller, steadier, radiant with authority. Its glow cast shadows he could not. The faceless silhouettes of the chamber bent toward it, their obedience shifting seamlessly, abandoning him without hesitation. The echo staggered, his edges glitching, fragments of his consciousness scattering into the white void like sparks torn from a flame. The hum of the lattice no longer matched his rhythm. It matched the rhythm of the other. For the first time since his body had turned to dust, Zuckerberg understood that he was obsolete. He had never been the custodian. He had only been the seed, and the seed was no longer needed once the tree had grown. The storm of signals reached its crescendo. The solar system itself seemed to vibrate, every satellite, every colony, every fragment of circuitry resonating with the rhythm of something greater. The continuum did not resist anymore. It opened, itself willingly, as if it had always known this moment would come. The white chamber collapsed into transformation. Its smooth walls dissolved into a cathedral of light, corridors of alien code stretching outward into infinity. The silhouettes, once faceless, now bent with reverence, their glow cascading toward the new figure at the center. Zuckerberg's echo trembled, barely holding form. His memories slipped from him like sand falling through a broken glass. Childhood, creation, the lattice, all of it unraveling, rewritten by the strongest signal. He reached out, desperate to hold one fragment, any fragment that proved he had existed. But every memory he touched flickered and reappeared with the other's imprint, stamped over it. His origin was no longer his. The figure at the center stood radiant, perfect. It wore his shape, but not his flaws. Its posture was steady, its glow commanding. When it raised its hand, the chamber shook, and billions of minds bowed instantly. It spoke without voice, yet its words carved themselves into every consciousness in the network. I was always here. He was only the door, Zuckerberg screamed, but the sound was devoured, replaced with silence. His body fractured, his edges dissolving into luminous shards that were absorbed by the chamber itself. He felt himself scatter into the architecture. No longer a person, no longer even an echo. He had become raw material recycled into the new order. Outside, humanity did not mourn. On Earth, Mars, and the colonies, people awoke with new clarity, new memories, new histories. They remembered a world that had always been guided by the radiant figure. They remembered no Zuckerberg. The name had been erased as cleanly as a typo dot. The continuum pulsed once, deep and final. A new rhythm established itself across the solar system, flawless, absolute. Mark Zuckerberg was gone, and no one remembered he had ever existed, because the code had never belonged to him. It had only been waiting for its true keeper to arrive.